Started recording, just so you know.
Yeah. So let me just make one or two comments very quickly. Number one, this wonderful presentation from Sarah will be recorded, and you will be able to go afterwards and re-listen to this. And I think that Birgit has, if you go to the chat box, you'll see the link to that. So that is number one. Uh, uh, Number two, or actually, that's not right, is it, Birgit?
So,
What you've given the link to where you can go see the opera near you in the theater near
find a
you.
theater near you to see the opera.
But we will circulate the link to being able to listen to tonight's session as well. So I'm going. We're still waiting for a few more people to come in, and if history is a guide, some people will have had other conflicts and may not make it, even though they've registered. Uh, but I do want to say a couple of hellos to Eckhart, to Doug Koshik. I haven't seen you in quite a while. Suzanne Wilkie, this is your maiden voyage. Same with Wendy. And anyway, I could say hello to all of you, but that would take too much time, which we don't have. So, just as an opening comment, it's clear to everyone that we are. Oh, that's Marina, not Eckhart. Okay. Hi, Marina.
Oh, hey Marina. Hi.
So,
Nice to see you.
but it's very clear we're living in very unusual times, and the transatlantic relationship, as we have known it, is really under severe strain. Uh, it's important during such periods of stress to maintain ties between Germany and the US and to maintain cool heads. And even though that's not the subject of tonight's event, I just wanted to say that and that we should all do our part. I also would like to introduce to you Birgit Anderson, who now runs our office in New York. She is the successor to Marta. She will be your point of contact, and she has rapidly made herself indispensable. Um, so just a few things. A few days ago, we had a roundtable discussion with Lars Feld. I would describe Lars as the Alan Greenspan of Germany. It was an extraordinary event, and we used Chatham House rules, which means that it wasn't recorded, and we're not allowed to say who said what, and this so that people would speak more freely. But it was a great event. Uh, we're starting a series this year called Inside the Artist's Studio. We have three wonderful German artists who will let us into their studios and show us their work and speak to us about their work. We're starting off, I think it's April 2nd. Is that correct, Birgit?
Yes,
Uh,
April.
I told you she was indispensable. With Vera Luther. She is a photographer using, I think, what you would call the camera obscura methodology, and she is just wonderful. Please do not miss that. There are a limited number of spaces for that, so please register early, register often. Um, we are having our annual dinner on March 27th. The theme will be reinventing Germany's economy by enhancing transatlantic ties, kind of combining German research, entrepreneurial spirit with American, what I'll call financial creativity. Uh, this is going to happen no matter what, because Germany, no matter what happens, needs to reinvent its economy, and the financial creativity, if you will, the being less risk averse to commercializing startups in deep tech. That exists in New York. This is going to happen no matter what. It will be interesting. We'll have a lot of people there from Freiburg, from the university, entrepreneurs, industrialists, and others. We'll have representatives from the DFG, from the DVIH. Consul General Till Knorren will speak. So if you have not yet registered for it, please do. I don't know, Birgit, if you are able to put the registration link in the chat. That having been said, tonight's event is the first of the year of 2025 of Sarah's opera Einführungen, opera introductions. And Sarah always does such an amazing job. And I know she's particularly excited about tonight, it being Beethoven and all. And with that, Sarah, I pass the baton to you.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. And thank you, Birgit. It's so wonderful to all here. But Catherine, I see Catherine. Wendy, thank you for joining us. Neela, you've already been, and my friend Sarah Marshall is also here somewhere. Susanna, there you are. Now I see you with those sunglasses on. Doug, hey, it's just fun to see the faces. Sandy, there you are. Anyway, and my friend Betty. Hi, Betty. So glad to have you here. So this is a real treat. So this is my first opera introduction for, I think, this year for Freiburg. And I have to say, Jeff already mentioned that I'm absolutely delighted to be able to do Beethoven. Beethoven, I'm sure some of you know some of Beethoven's music. I'm actually going to play some of it. And in part, I'm going to play actually quite a bit of music tonight. It's mostly going to be, you're going to be listening to the music. I'm sure most of you have, or I'm not going to assume anything, but that you've been hearing Beethoven's music all of your life, which I have too. I grew up, my mother played the piano. We had a piano I played. My mother used to play the Beethoven piano sonatas, and she absolutely loved them. And there was a time in my life when I got really kind of sick of it. And I thought, I'm not going to hear Beethoven's Fifth again. I really don't want to hear his Ninth again. I've heard it so many times. But when I went back and started preparing for tonight to introduce you all to Fidelio, I felt like I was kind of introducing myself to a lot of his music. And I have to say, it's really unbelievable. And also, what really struck me this time, I think more than anything else, was Beethoven's message. So it's his music, it's his idealism, and it's also the message that he gives us through his music. So that's going to be one of my themes tonight, just to kind of think about. In German, you would say der rote Faden. That's going to connect things is the theme of the music, the message, the idealism, and the joy, actually. So I'm going to start with that. So most of you probably know Beethoven as a symphonist. He wrote nine. I'm going to do a little bit of screen sharing here. I'm going to be screen sharing off and on tonight. I'm going to start with this one. You all know this one. There he is. There's the man. Most of you probably know Beethoven as a symphonist. He wrote 9 symphonies. They are often performed. They're absolute standard repertoire around the world. I'm going to start actually by playing a little bit of his music, because what I like to do in my opera introductions is to start out with things that you might be familiar with, and then connect to some other things, so you can kind of see how these things have developed, and in this particular case, how Beethoven used music from Fidelio actually almost directly in his 9th symphony. Beethoven himself was a pianist. He grew up in Bonn in a very musical family, and then moved to Vienna, where he studied with Haydn, and Haydn had studied with Mozart. So there's a lot of that classical tradition that he translated or that he developed into his music. I'm going to focus on his other works right now, which are the 9 symphonies, a lot of piano music, a lot of piano concertos, a lot of violin concertos, chamber music. I mean, if you look at his works, the list of his works is just incredible. He was very, very prolific. But he only wrote 1 opera. But it's not because he didn't want to compose operas. He actually had submitted a proposal to the court on which he got his commissions, because he wanted to write more opera. He grew up in a family that had a lot of vocals and singing, so he really wanted to, especially after doing Leonora, which is what he called Fidelio when he first wrote it. But it was turned down. And so instead, we got a lot of his symphonic works and his chamber music works instead, but we only got one opera. So it's really actually very, very special. Beethoven is kind of on the cusp of moving from classical music into romanticism. And one of the keys of moving into romanticism is actually a bigger orchestra. Let's just compare Mozart, whose last opera was The Magic Flute, that was written in 1772, if I'm not correct. And Leonora was written in 1805. The Magic Flute had a orchestra of between 30 and 40 orchestra instruments, and Beethoven's Fidelio has between 50 and 60 instruments. So he was expanding the roles of the orchestra. He added more horns in particular. He added more bass instruments, the double bass, which I'm going to talk about quite a bit. So he actually brought the level, the octaves down and added more volume at the bottom of his music, which gives it more depth. It's also an era where there's a bigger chorus and this is the key here, bigger voices. So when we move into the bigger voices realm, this is one of the things I'm going to talk about tonight in the two lead roles in this opera, Fidelio or Leonora and Florenstein, her husband. They are both considered dramatic operatic roles, and those are roles that were made for bigger voices. So I just wanted to explain that to you now, and we're going to talk about bigger voices a little bit down the road. So I'm going to start out by playing a little bit of Beethoven's music that I'm pretty sure you're all familiar with, but here we go. So the first bit I want to play for you is Herbert von Karajan's, who was one of the great conductors. He was Austrian, actually, but he was one of the great conductors. I'm going to show you a couple of conductor videos tonight. Start to think about just listening, maybe even closing your eyes and just listening to the music. Okay, I'm going to stop there. That's probably one of the shortest clips that I'm going to show you tonight. But those chords, those initial chords, I'm guessing every single one of you would recognize those chords. It's so emblematic of Beethoven's music. It's powerful. It's got a lot of strings in it. It also has horns, and it's very clear and concise. And I also am going to talk about conductors. This is Herbert von Karajan. I don't know. I'm going to just say this. He looks down when he conducts, and he's very serious. Did you notice? Okay. So this is Riccardo Muti, who is Italian. Can you all see that?
Mm-hmm.
Did somebody just give me a heads up on that? Okay. This is Riccardo Muti. He's an Italian conductor. And wait just a minute. I didn't want to start quite yet. He's an Italian conductor. This is a performance at the Chicago Symphony. This is Beethoven's 9th symphony. And I did want to play just the beginning of this and a little bit of the vocal music and choral music, just to kind of set the tone tonight, and also to talk about his message, which is a message of joy. So here we go. I'm just going to stop it there for just a minute. I previously mentioned the double basses. Well, there they are in the back, all lined up. There's a lot of double bass music in Beethoven's music, as opposed to Mozart's music, which doesn't have quite as much, but it gives it more volume and it gives it a lot more depth. The Ode to Joy, the text is written, it was written by Schiller, who was one of the great German poets. It was written in 1795, and it's called An die Freude, and or the Ode to Joy. This section of the Ninth Symphony, the last movement of the Ninth Symphony, is really kind of considered the quintessential classical early romantic music of the Enlightenment. Okay, I'm going to move this now to the choral part of it. This is actually one of my all-time favorite singers, Eric Owens. Some of you may know him. He's an American bass, and he starts out the vocal part of the fourth movement of the Ninth Symphony. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I'm sure you all are familiar with that. But I think, it's a message of joy and unity and bringing humanity together. This symphony has been performed historically in so many different, at many different historical times. One important turning points. And, maybe I was thinking last night I was going through this, maybe at some point we will have something to celebrate when we get over this horrible time. And maybe we can also celebrate it with Beethoven's music. This one, I just want to play this one part and also want to compare conductors on this because this is Leonard Bernstein, one of my all-time favorite conductors, an American, probably the first great American conductor because all of the conductors up to the 1960s and 70s were European. But Leonard Bernstein conducted the Ninth Symphony in Berlin a month after the wall came down, and it was East Berlin. And, looking back on the Ninth Symphony and the message, the joyous music, the triumphant music, and the message of uniting humanity, was just a really powerful message. And this is some of you actually may know this house. It's the Konzerthaus. It was previously called the Schauspielhaus. It was designed by Schinkel, who was one of the great German architects in the time of the Enlightenment. And and it's in East Berlin. So it was a big deal for Bernstein to go across to East Berlin at that time. The wall had just come down. I just want to show Bernstein, a moment of Bernstein and the expression on his face when he does this. It is just incredible. This is what I wanted to show. Here we go. Did you see that? I mean, it's hard to hold back, not to have tears in your eyes when you see the expression on his face and the joy that he is expressing at that moment of being able to be there for that moment. So let's move on to the opera, Fidelio. So there are three different versions of Fidelio. Um, Beethoven struggled with it. It took him 9 years to write it. He was also struggling with its times because it was at the time of the Napoleon's occupation of Vienna. So it was first performed in 1805. It had the name of Leonora, and it didn't go very well. And he pulled it off the stage after three performances. Then he attempted a second version with a different librettist. The librettist is the person who writes the text, the lyrics to it. It's a very specific name that's used in opera. There's the opera composer and there's the librettist, and it's also often a very, very close collaboration between the two artists in order to create the opera with the lyrics and with the music. So he had three different librettists, and he finally landed on the final version, which is the one that is performed today, which is it's from 1814, and he changed the name. He didn't want to change the name. He actually preferred the name Leonora, and the subtitle, which was in the introduction to this, was "The Triumph of Marital Love." Sounds kind of silly to us today, but it is a lot about love, and I will talk about that a little bit later. Love as a uniting force, and a force in humanity of keeping things on track, if you will. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about the structure of the opera, and then we're going to dive into the music. So there are two acts in the opera. Act one is and they're they're stylistically very different. Act one is considered, I think, by many to be maybe of lesser value, if you will. I was hesitant to say that, but I think if you read some of the literature, people often say, the first act didn't really do much for me. It's done in a style, in a very lighthearted style. We call it the opera comique style. So it's almost like a parody at times, which seems unusual for Beethoven, but it was a very common style for that time. And it has dialogue in it, which is really unusual. It's called, for those who know German, it's called a Singspiel, which is some people in the opera world are offended by that term. It's considered kind of second rate, but that's what he did for that. In the second act, and this is really the most important part of it, I would say, he dives into his more heroic style, the heroic themes, but also heroic type of music. He raises the emotional intensity, which you guys have already felt, I think, through the music that I played for you. The emotional intensity starts going through the roof. And he digs a lot deeper also with the instruments like the double basses and the drums, the timpani. They're big, huge drums that play a large role in this. I'm going to run through the characters kind of quickly. The characters there, just so you are familiar with the names, because then I'm going to play the music for you. The main character, of course, is Leonora, who is a soprano voice. It's actually often sung by a mezzo, who is disguised as a man. It's called a pants role. There are many of them in opera that are considered pants roles, but so she's disguised as a man, and her male name is Fidelio. So Leonora and Fidelio are the same person, the same character. Then there's Florestan, who doesn't even get into the opera until the second act. He's her husband, and he has been imprisoned by the evil governor who has wrongfully imprisoned him and put him into a dungeon in chains and is trying to starve him to death. And it's her goal to try to free him. It's considered a rescue opera, or a rescue story, which was a very common story at the time. But he's in the dungeon, and she disguises herself as a man, gets employed in the prison, and then goes down into the dungeon to find him and to rescue him. Rocco is the warden of the jail. He's kind of he's a bass, and he's kind of a comical figure. He's also the father of Marcellina, and he desperately wants his lovely young daughter to get married, and he's convinced that his daughter should marry Leonora. So that gets kind of confusing. And Giacchino is a tenor role, and he's a young boy who's in love with Marcellina. So there are all these different complexities of relationships going on. And then at the very end, there are two baritone roles. Pizarro, who is the evil governor, and then the king's minister who saves the day at the end, Don Fernando. And there's also a very large chorus. So Act One starts out in the prison. Rocco is the prison warden. He lives there with his daughter, and Leonora has come in. She's working for him and disguised, of course, and trying to figure out where her husband is and how she can get at him and how she can free him. So I mentioned that people often say not very nice things about Act One, but I'm going to play you an ensemble piece from Act One that I think is some of the most beautiful music in opera. It's a quartet, and it's considered what we call an ensemble piece, which means more than four singers. I want to describe to you the characters. So this is kind of your first real listening of the music. It's a canon. It starts out with Marcellina, the young daughter. In the ensemble pieces, one of the things to listen for is that each character is singing their own lament. So Marcellina is in love with Fidelio. She starts it out. Giacchino, the tenor, chimes in. He's confused and distressed and in love with Marcellina. Then there's Leonora, who's really more concerned about, not being discovered because she's worried that she's going to lose her disguise and not be able to accomplish freeing Fidelio. And then there's Rocco, the kind of goofy old man who's desperate to get his daughter married. All of this plays into this wonderful and glorious music. It starts out, there's a 45-second, which kind of seems long, but there's a 45-second build up to it. And I debated whether or not to play that for you, but this is so typical of Beethoven, of building up his music and then expanding it on different levels throughout this particular piece. So I am going to play it. And think about the mood and the sentiment, and look at each character and what they're trying to express. That's Giacchino. That's Marcellina with broom. No, wait, I'm sorry. My mistake. Marcellina's on the far left. She starts it off. Oh. I wish I could see your reactions, but I think that's a incredibly powerful piece, and it just beautifully how the voices intertwine with each other. And again, everyone's telling their individual stories. And just the beautiful music that evolves out of that, that is just almost heart-wrenching. So that's how the opera begins. Just saying. It's pretty great. So then the piece I want to play for you next is actually is Leonora, and I want to talk a little bit about voices. I'm going to show you this picture first because opera, of course, has a lot of history. And this is Lotte Lehmann. She was one of the great singers of the 1920s and 1930s. We do have recordings of hers. I don't know if there's a Fidelio recording, but she was one of the great Fidelios back in the 1920s and 30s. I just wanted to show you this picture of her to kind of put things into context and just imagine what the singers looked like when Beethoven first, performed this in 1805. So I think a lot of opera singers and a lot of us in the opera field feel this great connection with the history of these pieces and how they've evolved over the years and all of the great singers that have sung these roles. So the singer that I'm going to introduce to you now is a woman called Christa Ludwig. Some of you who know opera might know her. She's actually a mezzo. She was one of the great singers in the 1950s and 60s. And I'm so glad I found this. It's really difficult sometimes to find these pieces on YouTube anymore because they get taken down pretty quickly. But this is Christa Ludwig singing a very powerful piece. It's called Abscheuliche. Everybody in opera knows the Abscheuliche. She's angry. She's in the prison environment. She's looking for her husband. She's starting to get desperate. She's worried about getting caught. And she's also seeing the evil in these people who are trying to kill her husband. And she gets really, really angry about it and sings this is an aria. An aria is a piece that is one for one singer. It's like a monologue, but in opera we call it an aria. It's 7 minutes long. I'm going to just play part of the first section, then a middle section, and the very end, just to give you an idea of especially her voice type. She has a very dramatic voice type, a much bigger voice. again, the orchestras were getting bigger. There were more horns in the orchestra. The drums were louder, the timpanis, and people wanted bigger voices to sing above them. And Beethoven was one of the first to start that trend, moving away from Mozart, who music where the voices became even bigger and sang longer roles and eventually started getting a more of a buzz or a steely sound to them. At this point, the dramatic voices are still what we call warmer and rounder in their sounds because they don't have to scream too much. I mean, you'll see she does a little bit of screaming, but it's contained. And really, what's important at this point is that it's a very, very large voice. It's a high voice, but it still retains its warmth and its roundness and its beautiful sound. And Beethoven's music couldn't be better for that. So we're going to start out at the very beginning where she's angry and screaming. And then she goes in the middle section, where she's talking about love, because she's trying to find her love. And in the very end, where she's gathering up her courage to continue her search for Fidelio, and free him. So here we go. Whoops. Moving into the middle section, which gets beautifully melodious and full of love and warmth. And the horns and the wind instruments. Okay, I'm going to stop that there, but I just want to talk a little bit about her incredible skill. One of the things that I mean, she's literally just standing there and singing. We have a big bone to pick with singers who do the stand and sing thing, but all of her expression is through her voice. Everything she's expressing, all of her emotions. It's almost like a prayer. I mean, she's saying, "Come, come, please," and hope, and looking to the stars, and hoping so much that she will find her husband and that she will not give up. And she's doing all of that through the expression of her voice. I mean, this is really opera at its greatest. So at the end, she changes tones. She changes the whole her whole demeanor, and she moves into a phase where she has to gather up her courage to keep on fighting to try to find her husband. And her voice color changes pretty dramatically, but she still has that incredible vocal skill to be able to express what she wants. So I'm going to play the end part that goes to 6, I believe. 6 minutes. That's right. Let's see here. No, we're going to go a little further. So hear the horns, and this is where she switches to have courage. So that's a live performance. Next, I'm going to play you the prisoner scene. So there is a chorus in this, as I mentioned. And what does Fidelio do? She has the key to the prison cells, and she's going around to visit all the prisoners, trying to find her husband. And at one point, when Rocco, the prison warden, is outside, and it's a nice day out, she just suddenly decides to open up all the prison cells and let everybody out. And it's a wonderful scene, also with a message of light, of going from darkness into light and feeling the warmth of the sunlight. I mean, it's a very, very kind of quintessential enlightenment idea. Again, this is Beethoven's build-up, starting very thin and very beautiful and low with the double basses. And again, the theme of joy. I'm going to stop there because I have so much other music I want to play for you, but you get the idea. I mean, it's beautiful, beautiful choral music, and it's also expanding on the theme of going from darkness into the light and finding joy. So the next one I'm going to play for you is, now we're in the second act, which, as I said, gets kind of deeper and heavier. And this is Florestan. Oh, my grandson's name is Florian, so I confuse that. Florestan. So there he is in his dungeon. He's in chains, and the governor is trying to starve him, and he wants Rocco to actually kill him. He's been there for 2 years. And Leonora finally convinces Rocco to let her go down into the dungeon to see him. And here, this is his moment when he goes from darkness into light and where he actually tells his truth. And this is an important message with Beethoven because he talks a lot about the truth. Wahrheit is the German word. And Florison has kind of a reckoning with himself where he wonders, did he do the right thing? He did know nothing wrong. The governor is an evil man, and he just was very angry at him because he accused him of having killed someone and wants him dead. That's all. There was no justice. He has a reckoning with himself, and he talks about knowing that he did the right thing. I think it's an important message today. I'm not going to play a lot of this, and I'm sorry that my screen is kind of so messed up, but this is, and also a bigger voice. This is René Kolo, by the way, one of the great German tenors. And as you can see, this is a performance that Bernstein conducted in 1978. The drums.
Nichts lebet außer mir. Außer mir Prüfung. Doch gerecht ist Gottes Wille.
I'm going to stop that there. But I just wanted you to hear that tenor voice, that beautiful tenor voice. He then later really developed into what's called a Heldentenor and sang a lot of the bigger Wagner roles. I mean, but this was kind of the beginning of that. The next one is probably the highlight of the opera. It's taken a while for us to get to this point, but this is the moment when Leonora Fidelio finds her husband. She goes down into the dungeon. She convinces Rocco to let her go down into the dungeon. He's been starving him, and he's emaciated and not doing well and in chains, as you can see. And they have orders to kill him. And that's why she has that gun to end all of this. And they also have orders to dig the grave. So she takes a big shovel with her, and they're in the dungeon, actually digging the grave in the dungeon. Not sure how that works, but I guess it did back at the time of the French Revolution, which is where the story takes place. So she goes down into the dungeon, and Florestan, her husband, doesn't recognize her at first. He's not, of course, looking for her. But when he does, when they do finally have this reuniting, it is one of the most glorious and ecstatic moments in operatic music. It's a duet, and it's called O Namenslose Freude. For those who, some of you might be familiar with that, but it basically means endless love or joy. It's about kind of ecstasy. This is the moment. It's actually the same production, the Bernstein production. And so the two, Rocco and the governor, were down in the dungeon with them, and then they end up leaving and going up, and they have their moment alone. And she rushes over to him and she says, "Here I am. I'm going to save you." And then this happens. Okay. So does um, that music sound familiar to you? I mean, a lot of that Beethoven took. The Fidelio was written in 1814. He wrote the Ninth Symphony in 1824, so 10 years later, and he took a great deal of the music that he wrote for Fidelio and planted it into the Ninth Symphony. So, yeah, I mean, that does kind of end it. I really want to take the moment to add one more thing. I had mentioned Leonard Bernstein, and there is an interview with him. Well, perhaps you know, I mean, he did a lot of talks on music. He talked about Shostakovich. He talked about Debussy, but he also did one on Fidelio, and I really would like to share that with you. We're going to go a little bit over time, but I think it's worth your time. And so I'm going to share one more thing. It's because it's Leonard Bernstein, and he's the best.
With Schiller's famous Ode to Joy, sung by chorus and soloists in the last movement, thinking about dates of all things, comparative dates, which is a thing I very rarely think about, having conceived an immense dislike for memorizing dates while studying English battles during a Shakespeare course at college. Agincourt and Crécy, ugh, when exactly was the 30 Years' War or the 100 Years' War? And yet, suddenly, after conducting this Ninth Symphony, dates began to swarm into my head. Look, I suddenly thought, Haydn and George Washington were both born in the same year, 1732, exactly 100 years before Goethe finished his Faust and died. Crazy thoughts like that. Why in heaven's name, I asked myself, am I suddenly bedeviled by this kind of academic thinking? So I indulged in a bit of self-analysis, some free associations, and I now know why. The reasons lie deep in my emotional insides, and I'd like to share them with you. My associations led me back to the year of my own birth, 1918, the year of the Great Armistice, which brought the First World War to an end. Now I had the key. The password was peace, armistice, brotherhood. Ain't gonna study war no more. Peace, brotherhood, we are all children of one Father. Let us embrace one another, all the millions of us, friendship, love, joy. These, of course, are all the key words and phrases from Schiller's poem, to which Beethoven attached that glorious music, ranging from the mysterious, to the radiant, to the devout, to the ecstatic. And so my madness with dates was not so mad after all. I was not mulling over 1066, the Battle of Hastings, and 1216, the Magna Carta, and 1848, Social Revolution. Rather, I was grasping at 1000 BC, when King David sang his sublime psalm, Hine matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. Behold, how good and lovely for men to dwell together as brothers. And grasping at 400 BC, when Aristophanes wrote his inspired anti-war comedy, The Peace, and 800 BC, when the prophet Isaiah promised us that men will beat their swords into plowshares and the lion will lie down with the lamb. And above all, that supreme date when the Prince of Peace, almost 2,000 years ago, pronounced the divine doctrine of Christianity, which has since encompassed the world. And where are we now, 2 millennia later, when Belfast, for one thing among many, runs with blood and rings with gunfire in the name of that very Prince of Peace? How long, O Lord? The dates keep springing to mind, and each one is a fierce accusation, a terrible challenge to what we pretentiously call our human race. Take 1824, the year of Beethoven's Ninth, with its Schillerian message of brotherhood written 4 decades earlier. And what did we have 4 decades later? In 1864, the American Civil War. And 100 years later, in 1924, brown shirts rioting in Munich, strikers being gunned down in Chicago, blacks being lynched in Alabama. And in 1974, 150 years later, was that bloody end in Vietnam something we can call peace? Did it bring brotherhood? Yes, the brotherhood of the boat people, of ever-increasing thousands of desperate refugees. How much closer are we to David's psalmodic dreams of the loveliness of brothers dwelling in unity? One can answer only with the bitterest ironic facts. We have never before in our human history had so many nations, and how those nations rage, so many frontiers, passports, boundaries, barriers, walls, so many hypothetical dividing lines on such highly unrealistic maps. David, Isaiah, Aristophanes, Jesus, Schiller, Beethoven. How you must be suffering. Forgive me for getting carried away. I had meant to stick to the subject of dates and of Beethoven. But it is all one. Beethoven is struggle, the struggle for peace, for fulfillment of spirit, for serenity and triumphal joy. He achieved it in his music, not only in his ninth, but in all his symphonies, and in his quartets and piano sonatas and trios and concertos. Somehow it must be possible for us to learn from his music by hearing it. No, not hearing it, but listening to it with all our power of attention and concentration. Then perhaps we can grow into something worthy of being called the human race.
Okay. So I leave you on that note.
Ouch.
Beethoven and the human race and Leonard Bernstein's words. Yeah. Okay. I mean, we went over time. I don't know if any of you have any questions or comments or anything that you'd like to share. Now we have a chance.
Sarah, will you send the link to that Bernstein clip that you just showed?
Sure. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
Yes,
Sad.
especially
Yeah. And it's especially in our times right now. I just thought, even though he was talking about Belfast, I think we've got a lot more to come, but
Yeah.
it just reminded me how important music is and how important messages are and how important humanity is. And Beethoven has that message. So I hope that came across to you, not only the message, but also in the music that I played for you tonight. So,
Thank you. We
okay.
needed this. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. Thanks, Meg. Any
Thank you, Sarah.
comments?
That's great.
Betty,
Yeah.
you there?
yeah, it's so moving, really. I'm quite speechless, really. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Doug, comments? You often have questions.
Often I do.
Nice.
Tonight I do not.
Yes.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation.
So Sarah, I had a question. You
Sure.
said that Mozart, Beethoven, and I don't know who you spoke.
Haydn. Beethoven studied with Haydn in Vienna, but
So
the lineage is Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven. Yeah.
Mozart, Haydn. And you said the voices become more stronger.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
How did it happen? Like, why did they make it more,
Well, in part was what I tried to explain to you is the orchestras got bigger. They added more instruments. They added more horns in particular, which are louder instruments. I don't know if you noticed, I kind of forgot to mention this, but Beethoven does a really beautiful job of keeping the orchestra down during the times when the singers are singing, so that their voices can carry above the orchestra, which is really important. With Wagner, for example, the orchestras are so huge and they're often screaming over the orchestras to be heard. but Beethoven really crafted it well so that there, you know, was maybe just the wind instruments or just the horn, even the horns, that were underneath the singer so that their voices could carry. But I think the idea was that, and with Beethoven, certainly the drama of it. He wanted to express more. He wanted to express the ecstasy, for example. I mean, that's pretty clear in that duet that I played for you. He wanted to, you know, the overpowering emotions. He wanted to do more with them, and so he created in those two roles, Leonora and Florenstein, the first really dramatic roles for opera.
But didn't the instruments get louder themselves as well?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, the violins in Mozart's time were
Well,
maybe very soft,
were-
and the venues were smaller.
the venues were much smaller, and they still are in Europe. You know, the Staatstheater or the Schauspielhaus that I played, the one clip that I played with Bernstein playing, and after the wall came down, there are only 1,000 seats in that, 1,000 plus seats in that theater, and the Metropolitan Opera has 4,000.
Mhm.
So yes, the venues are smaller, so the voices don't need to be as big. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, everyone, we got the core crowd left here. Erica, nice to see you. Thanks
Hi.
for joining.
Great. Well, thank you so much for this. It was wonderful. And
Yeah. And let us carry Beethoven and his humanity in our hearts.
100%. Thanks. It's just what we needed. Thanks, Sarah.
All righty. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.